The morning my grandmother died, the air in her Victorian mansion smelled like lavender and regret. I stood in the doorway of her bedroom, my fingers gripping the cold brass handle so tightly my knuckles had gone white. The hospice nurse brushed past me with a sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes, and I heard my mother's sobs echoing from somewhere down the hallway, raw and broken like something fundamental inside her had shattered. Sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, casting intricate shadows across the hardwood floor, and I remember thinking how strange it was that the world could look so beautiful on such a terrible day. My name is Rebecca Chen, and I was 28 years old when everything I thought I knew about my family turned into a lie. Grandmother Eleanor had been the anchor of our family for as long as I could remember, a sharp-minded woman with steel gray hair always pulled back in a perfect bun and eyes that could see right through any deception. She had built a fortune in real estate over 5 decades, turning a single apartment building in downtown Seattle into an empire worth millions. And now she was gone, leaving behind not just grief but an inheritance that would change everything. The funeral was held 3 days later on a Thursday afternoon that felt too warm for October. The cemetery sprawled across rolling hills covered in perfectly manicured grass that smelled freshly cut, mixing with the scent of hundreds of flowers and the faint diesel exhaust from the idling cars lining the narrow road. I wore a black dress that felt too tight around my ribs, making each breath a conscious effort. My cousin Marcus stood across from me at the graveside, his tall frame draped in an expensive charcoal suit, his dark hair slicked back with too much gel. He caught my eye and nodded, his expression appropriately somber, but I noticed his jaw was clenched, a muscle twitching beneath his carefully composed facade. Marcus and I had grown up together, spending summers at Grandmother Eleanor's estate, running through the gardens and hiding in the library that smelled of old leather and pipe tobacco. But somewhere along the way, we had drifted apart. He had gone into finance, working at a hedge fund in New York, while I had stayed in Seattle, teaching high school English and living in a modest apartment in Capitol Hill. The distance between us wasn't just geographical anymore. After the service, we gathered at the mansion for the reading of the will. The house felt different without Grandmother Eleanor in it, like a body without a soul. The grandfather clock in the entrance hall ticked loudly, each second marked with a heavy metallic click that seemed to count down to something inevitable. I could smell coffee brewing in the kitchen, bitter and strong, and the faint mustiness of the old house settling around us like a shroud. The lawyer, a thin man named Gerald Hutchins with wire-rimmed glasses and a briefcase that looked older than I was, sat at the head of the dining room table. The wood was dark mahogany, polished to a mirror shine, and I could see my reflection in it, distorted and ghostly. My mother sat to my right, her hands folded in her lap, fingers worrying at a tissue until it began to shred. My Uncle Richard, Marcus's father, sat across from us, his face red and puffy from either grief or the 3 whiskeys I had seen him pour in the library before we sat down. Marcus took the seat next to his father, and I noticed his leg bouncing under the table, a nervous energy radiating from him that made the air feel charged. His mother, Aunt Patricia, was absent. She had divorced Uncle Richard 5 years ago and moved to Arizona, cutting ties with most of the family except for occasional phone calls to Marcus. Gerald cleared his throat, the sound dry and papery, and opened a manila folder. The rustle of papers seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Outside, I could hear a crow cawing, harsh and insistent, and the distant hum of traffic from the main road half a mile away. Eleanor Chen had been very specific in her will. The bulk of her estate, including the real estate holdings and investment portfolio worth approximately $7 million, was to be divided equally between her 2 grandchildren, Marcus and myself. The mansion and its contents would go to my mother, her only daughter. Uncle Richard would receive a trust fund of $500,000 to be distributed over 10 years. I watched Uncle Richard's face as Gerald read the terms. His jaw tightened, and his hands curled into fists on the table. The knuckles went white, and I could see a vein pulsing in his temple. Marcus remained perfectly still, but I noticed his eyes had gone cold, calculating. Something unspoken passed between father and son, a look that made my stomach clench with unease. The meeting ended with handshakes and murmured condolences, and everyone dispersed into the house like ghosts retreating to their corners. I found myself in the library, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that smelled like vanilla and old paper. The leather armchair where Grandmother Eleanor used to sit still held the impression of her body, and I sank into it, feeling the worn cushion conform to my shape. Through the window, I could see the garden where roses bloomed in defiance of the season, their petals deep red like drops of blood against the green. My phone buzzed in my purse, and I pulled it out to see a text from my best friend Sarah. "Thinking of you today. Call me if you need anything." I tacked back a quick thank you and set the phone on the side table, but before I could settle back into the chair, I heard raised voices from down the hall. I stood and moved quietly toward the sound, my heels clicking softly on the hardwood until I reached the Persian runner that muffled my footsteps. The voices were coming from Grandmother's study, a room she had kept locked during her final months. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see Uncle Richard and Marcus inside, their backs to me. "She always favored them," Uncle Richard was saying, his voice thick with bitterness. "Your mother and Rebecca. Never thought I was good enough, never thought you were either. 500,000 over 10 years? That's an insult. An insult to everything I did for her." Marcus's voice was calmer, measured. "We need to think strategically, Dad. Getting angry won't change anything. But there might be other options." "What options?" Uncle Richard demanded. "The will is ironclad. Gerald said so himself." There was a pause, and I held my breath, pressing myself against the wall. My heart hammered in my chest, so loud I was sure they would hear it. "Rebecca's share," Marcus said slowly. "If something happened to her, if she was unable to claim the inheritance, it would revert to the next of kin. That would be you, Dad." The words hung in the air like poison. I felt ice water flood my veins, and my hands began to tremble. I backed away from the door as quietly as I could, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. When I reached the library, I grabbed my purse and coat and left through the side door, not bothering to say goodbye to anyone. The drive back to my apartment was a blur. Seattle streets were slick with rain that had started falling in a steady drizzle, and the windshield wipers beat a rhythmic pattern that did nothing to calm my racing thoughts. I told myself I had misunderstood, that Marcus couldn't possibly have meant what I thought he meant. But the cold certainty in his voice kept replaying in my mind, and I knew I hadn't imagined it. I parked in my building's underground garage, the concrete walls echoing with the sound of my car door slamming. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. I hurried to the elevator, my keys jangling in my shaking hand, and didn't relax until I was inside my apartment with the door locked and the chain engaged. My apartment was small but cozy, filled with mismatched furniture from thrift stores and walls covered in bookshelves. It smelled like the vanilla candle I had left burning that morning and the faint scent of the jasmine tea I always kept in a tin on the kitchen counter. I dropped my purse on the couch and went straight to the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of wine with hands that still trembled. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. Marcus was my cousin. We had played together as children, shared secrets and dreams. He wouldn't actually hurt me. Would he? But I couldn't shake the memory of his cold eyes at the funeral, the calculating look he had exchanged with his father. Money changed people. I had seen it happen before, read about it in countless news stories. Families torn apart by inheritance disputes, siblings who stopped speaking over a few $1,000s. 7 million was more than enough to make someone do something terrible. I called Sarah. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and concerned. "Beck? How are you holding up?" "I need to tell you something," I said, and the words came tumbling out. I told her everything, about the will, about the conversation I had overheard, about the fear that had settled in my chest like a stone. Sarah listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a long silence. "Beck," she said finally, "you need to go to the police." "And tell them what?" I countered. That I overheard a conversation that might have been about nothing? They were just talking, Sarah. They didn't actually do anything. "Yet," Sarah said, and the word hung between us. "Promise me you'll be careful. Don't go anywhere alone with Marcus or your uncle. And maybe talk to a lawyer about the will, see if there's any way to protect yourself." I promised, though I wasn't sure what good it would do. After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my living room, watching the city lights flicker on across the skyline. The rain had intensified, drumming against the windows in a steady rhythm that should have been soothing but only made me feel more isolated. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange fog. I went to work, taught my classes, graded papers, but I felt like I was moving through water, everything muffled and distant. I avoided calls from Marcus, letting them go to voicemail. His messages were casual, asking how I was doing, suggesting we get coffee to talk about the estate. Each time I heard his voice, smooth and friendly, I felt a chill run down my spine. My mother called frequently, her voice still fragile with grief. She was staying at the mansion, going through grandmother Eleanor's things, and she asked several times if I would come help her. I made excuses, claiming I was swamped with work, that I would come by soon. I couldn't tell her what I had overheard. It would break her heart to know that her nephew and brother might be plotting against her daughter. On a Tuesday evening in early November, I was walking home from the grocery store, my arms full of bags that cut into my palms with their weight. The sun had already set, and the street was dark except for the pools of yellow light cast by the street lamps. The air was cold and damp, carrying the smell of wet pavement and the faint scent of wood smoke from someone's fireplace. My breath came out in small clouds, and I could feel the chill seeping through my coat. I was half a block from my building when I noticed the car. It was a dark sedan, parked across the street with its engine running, exhaust puffing white in the cold air. I couldn't see through the tinted windows, but something about it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I quickened my pace, my heart beginning to race, and I heard the car door open behind me. "Rebecca," a voice called out, and I spun around, nearly dropping my groceries. It was Marcus. He stood beside the sedan, his hands in the pockets of a long black coat, his expression unreadable in the dim light. My whole body went rigid, every muscle tensing for flight. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've been trying to reach you," he said, taking a step toward me. "You haven't been returning my calls." I was worried. "I've been busy," I said, backing toward my building. The grocery bags felt impossibly heavy, and I shifted them in my arms, acutely aware that my hands weren't free. "Work has been crazy." Too busy for family? Marcus asked, and there was something in his tone that made my stomach clench. We need to talk about the estate, Rebecca. There are decisions to make, paperwork to sign. We're in this together. I know, I said. I'll call you this week. I promise. But right now I really need to get inside. I have frozen food. I gestured with the bags, and Marcus glanced at them, then back at my face. For a moment, we just stood there, the space between us charged with unspoken tension. Then he nodded slowly. Okay, he said. But don't wait too long, Rebecca. Time is money, especially with an estate this size. There are tax implications, legal deadlines. We can't afford to drag our feet. I understand, I said, and turned toward my building, walking as quickly as I could without breaking into a run. I could feel his eyes on my back, and I didn't breathe properly until I was inside the lobby with the door locked behind me. Through the glass, I saw him standing on the sidewalk for a long moment before he got back in his car and drove away. That night, I barely slept. Every sound in the building made me jump, the creak of pipes, the distant slam of a door, the hum of the elevator. I kept thinking about Marcus waiting outside my building, about how he had known where I lived even though I had never given him my address. Of course, he could have asked my mother, or looked it up online. But the fact that he had come here, that he had been waiting for me, felt like a violation. The next morning, I called Gerald Hutchins, the lawyer. His secretary put me through after a brief hold, and his dry, professional voice came on the line. Miss Chen, he said. What can I do for you? I need to know about the will, I said. If something happened to me, what would happen to my share of the inheritance? There was a pause, and I heard papers rustling. Well, he said slowly, according to the terms of your grandmother's will, if you were to pass away or become legally incapacitated before the estate is fully distributed, your share would revert to the next of kin in the direct line. That would be your mother, as she is Eleanor's daughter. Not my uncle? I asked, my heart pounding. No, Gerald said. Richard is not in the direct line of inheritance for your portion. Why do you ask? Is there a concern? I hesitated, then said, no, I just wanted to understand the terms. Thank you, Mr. Hutchins. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my phone. Marcus had been wrong. Or he had lied to his father. Either way, if they were planning something, it was based on false information. I should have felt relieved, but instead, I felt more anxious. If they acted on their misunderstanding, I could still be in danger, and it would all be for nothing. I decided I needed to talk to someone official, someone who could help me figure out what to do. I looked up the number for the Seattle Police Department's non-emergency line and called. The officer who answered listened to my story with what sounded like polite skepticism. So you overheard a conversation that you interpreted as threatening, but no actual threat was made? He asked. Not explicitly, I admitted. But the implication was clear. Miss Chen, he said, his tone patient but firm, we can't investigate someone for a conversation. If you feel you're in immediate danger, you should call 911. Otherwise, I'd suggest documenting everything, keeping records of any contact, and if anything concrete happens, any actual threat or action, then we can help you. I thanked him and hung up, feeling more alone than ever. I was trapped in a nightmare of my own paranoia, unable to prove anything, unable to get help, but unable to shake the certainty that something terrible was coming. The following week, Marcus called again. This time, I answered, figuring it would be more suspicious if I kept avoiding him. Rebecca, he said, and his voice was warm, friendly, the cousin I remembered from childhood. I'm so glad I caught you. Listen, I'm flying back to New York tomorrow, but I really think we should meet before I go. There's something important I need to discuss with you about grandmother's estate. Can't we do it over the phone? I asked. It's complicated, he said. Legal stuff that's better explained in person. How about lunch tomorrow? That Italian place downtown you used to love, Marcello's. My treat. 1 o'clock? Every instinct screamed at me to say no, but I also knew I couldn't avoid him forever. And a public restaurant in the middle of the day felt safe enough. I agreed, and we set the time. I spent the rest of the day in a state of nervous anticipation. I told Sarah about the lunch, and she insisted on knowing exactly where I would be and when. I'll call you at 2, she said. If you don't answer, I'm calling the police. The next day, I arrived at Marcello's 15 minutes early. It was a small restaurant tucked between 2 office buildings, with red and white checkered tablecloths and the smell of garlic and tomato sauce heavy in the air. The lunch crowd was just starting to arrive, business people in suits and groups of friends laughing over shared plates of pasta. I chose a table near the window where I could see the street and waited, my hands folded in my lap to keep them from shaking. Marcus arrived exactly at 1, looking polished and professional in a navy suit and crisp white shirt. He smiled when he saw me and leaned down to kiss my cheek, his cologne sharp and expensive. I forced myself not to flinch. You look good, he said, settling into the chair across from me. How have you been? We made small talk while we ordered, discussing the weather and my job and his work in New York. He was charming, attentive, asking about my students and laughing at my stories about classroom mishaps. For a moment, I almost forgot why I was afraid of him. This was Marcus, my cousin, the boy who had taught me to ride a bike and helped me build a treehouse in grandmother's garden. But then the food arrived, steaming plates of fettuccine and chicken parmesan, and Marcus's expression shifted, becoming more serious. I need to talk to you about something, he said, setting down his fork. It's about the inheritance. My stomach tightened, and I forced myself to take a sip of water. The glass was cold and slick with condensation, and I gripped it tightly to keep my hand steady. I've been doing some research, Marcus continued, and I think we're making a mistake by just accepting the terms of the will as they are. There are tax strategies we could employ, ways to structure the distribution that would save us both a significant amount of money. But it requires some cooperation, some trust between us. What kind of cooperation? I asked carefully. Well, Marcus said, leaning forward, his eyes intent on mine, we could set up a joint trust, pool our resources temporarily to take advantage of certain investment opportunities. My firm has access to deals that could double our money in a year. But it requires both of us to commit our shares. I don't know anything about finance, Marcus, I said. That sounds risky. It's not, he insisted. I do this for a living, Rebecca. I know what I'm doing. And think about it, instead of $3.5 million, you could have 7. Maybe more. Isn't that worth considering? I need time to think about it, I said. And I'd want to talk to my own financial advisor. Something flickered in Marcus's eyes, annoyance maybe, or frustration, but it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. Of course, he said smoothly. Take your time. But don't take too long. These opportunities don't wait. We finished lunch with more small talk, but the ease from earlier was gone, replaced by a tension that made every bite of food taste like cardboard. When the check came, Marcus paid as promised, and we walked out together into the gray afternoon. The sky was heavy with clouds, and the air smelled like rain about to fall. "Think about what I said," Marcus told me, his hand on my shoulder. "We're family, Rebecca. We should be working together, not separately." I nodded and said goodbye, then walked quickly toward the bus stop, resisting the urge to look back. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out to see a text from Sarah. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I typed back. "Lunch was weird, but nothing happened. I'll call you later." But as I waited for the bus, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that Marcus's friendly facade was cracking, revealing something darker underneath. The investment opportunity sounded legitimate on the surface, but I couldn't help wondering if it was a trap, a way to get control of my inheritance. That night, I did something I had never done before. I went online and searched for Marcus's name, looking for any information about his work, his life in New York. What I found made my blood run cold. There were articles from financial news sites, mentions of Marcus Chin in connection with a hedge fund that had collapsed 2 years ago. Investors had lost millions, and there had been allegations of fraud, though no charges were ever filed. Marcus had left that firm and moved to another, but the stain of the scandal followed him. I found forum posts from angry investors, people who claimed Marcus had lied to them, convinced them to put their money into schemes that were too good to be true. My hands were shaking as I read, the glow of my laptop screen harsh in the darkness of my bedroom. Marcus wasn't just desperate for money. He was in trouble, possibly deep trouble, and my inheritance represented a lifeline. Or a target. I called Sarah again, and this time I told her everything I had found. She listened in silence, and when I finished, she said, "Beck, you need to go to the police. This is serious. He's not just talking anymore. He's actively trying to get access to your money." "But he hasn't done anything illegal," I protested. "Asking me to invest isn't a crime." "No," Sarah said, "but combined with what you overheard, it establishes a pattern. It shows motive. Please, Beck. Just talk to someone. File a report. Get it on record." She was right. I knew she was right. But the thought of going to the police, of officially accusing my cousin of planning to hurt me, felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. It would tear the family apart. My mother would be devastated. Uncle Richard would never forgive me. But what was the alternative? Wait until something actually happened? Wait until it was too late? I promised Sarah I would think about it, and we hung up. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the city outside my window. Car horns and distant sirens and the rumble of a garbage truck making its late-night rounds. Sleep felt impossible, but eventually, exhaustion pulled me under. I woke to my phone ringing, the shrill sound cutting through a dream I couldn't remember. I fumbled for it in the darkness, squinting at the screen. It was my mother, and it was 3 a.m. "Mom?" I answered, my voice thick with sleep. "What's wrong?" "Rebecca," she said, and her voice was high and panicked, breathless. "It's Marcus. He's been kidnapped." I sat up, suddenly wide awake, my heart hammering. "What? What do you mean kidnapped?" "Richard just called me," she said, her words tumbling over each other. "He got a call from someone claiming they have Marcus. They're demanding ransom." $2 million. Oh God, Rebecca, what are we going to do? Have you called the police? I asked, already getting out of bed, my mind racing. Richard is calling them now, she said. But he wanted me to know. He's beside himself. Can you come to the mansion? Please? I need you here. I'm on my way, I said, and hung up. I dressed quickly, pulling on jeans and a sweater, my hands clumsy with adrenaline. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what my mother had told me. Marcus kidnapped? It seemed impossible, surreal. But as I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, another thought crept in, cold and insidious. What if this was part of the plan? The drive to the mansion took 30 minutes, the streets nearly empty at this hour. The sky was still dark, but there was a faint lightning on the horizon, the promise of dawn. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my thoughts a chaotic tangle. If Marcus had been kidnapped, it was a tragedy, a nightmare. But if he was faking it, if this was some elaborate scheme, then what was the end game? When I arrived at the mansion, every light was on, blazing against the darkness. I parked and hurried to the front door, which opened before I could knock. My mother stood there, her face pale and drawn, her eyes red from crying. She pulled me into a tight hug, and I could feel her trembling. Inside, the house was filled with a tense, electric energy. Uncle Richard was in the living room, pacing back and forth, his phone pressed to his ear. He looked like he had aged 10 years overnight, his face haggard, his hair disheveled. When he saw me, he ended his call and came over. "Rebecca," he said, his voice rough. "Thank God you're here. This is a nightmare. An absolute nightmare." "What happened?" I asked. "Tell me everything." Richard sank onto the couch, his hands shaking. "I got a call about an hour ago," he said. A man's voice, distorted, like he was using some kind of device. He said they had Marcus, that he was alive but wouldn't stay that way unless I paid $2 million. He gave me instructions, said I had 48 hours to get the money together. "Did he offer any proof?" I asked. "Did you hear Marcus's voice?" Richard shook his head. "No." I asked, but he just laughed and hung up. Then I got a text from Marcus's phone. A photo. He pulled out his phone and showed me. The image was dark and grainy, but I could make out a figure slumped in a chair, hands bound, head hanging forward. The face was obscured by shadows, but the build looked right, the dark hair. "Have you tried calling Marcus?" I asked. "It goes straight to voicemail," Richard said. "I've tried a dozen times." My mother sat down beside Richard, taking his hand. "The police are on their way," she said. "They'll know what to do." We waited in tense silence, the grandfather clock in the hall marking each minute with its heavy tick. I kept staring at the photo on Richard's phone, trying to see details, trying to determine if it was real. But the image was too poor, too deliberately obscured. The police arrived 20 minutes later, 2 detectives in plain clothes. The older one was a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She introduced herself as Detective Linda Morrison. Her partner was younger, a man in his 30s named Detective James Park, with dark hair and a serious expression. They sat down with Uncle Richard and went through everything again, asking detailed questions about the call, the photo, Marcus's last known whereabouts. Richard told them Marcus had been staying at a hotel downtown, that he was supposed to fly back to New York that morning. We'll need access to his hotel room, Detective Morrison said. And we'll need to trace his phone, see if we can get a location. Mr. Chen, I need you to forward me that photo and any other communications you receive. Richard nodded, his face pale. What about the ransom? Should I start getting the money together? Don't do anything yet, Detective Morrison said. In most kidnapping cases, paying the ransom doesn't guarantee the victim's safety. We need to verify that this is legitimate before we proceed. Legitimate? Richard's voice rose. You think this is a hoax? We have to consider all possibilities, Detective Park said gently. Sometimes these situations aren't what they appear to be. I felt a chill run through me. The detectives were thinking the same thing I was. This could be fake. Detective Morrison turned to me. And you are? Rebecca Chen, I said. Marcus's cousin. When did you last see Marcus? She asked. Yesterday, I said. We had lunch downtown. At Marcello's. How did he seem? Any indication he was worried about anything? Afraid? I hesitated, aware that everyone was looking at me. He seemed fine, I said carefully. We talked about the estate. Our grandmother recently passed away, and we're both inheriting. Detective Morrison's eyes sharpened. How much are we talking about? Several million, I said. Each. The two detectives exchanged a look, and I could see the wheels turning. Motive. If this was a fake kidnapping, Marcus had motive. He needed money, and this was a way to get it from his father, from the family. We'll need to speak with each of you individually, Detective Morrison said. Get full statements. And Miss Chen, I'd like to start with you. She led me to the study, the same room where I had overheard Marcus and Richard talking weeks ago. The memory made my skin crawl. We sat across from each other at the desk, and Detective Morrison pulled out a notebook. Tell me about your relationship with Marcus, she said. I took a deep breath and decided to tell her everything. About the will, about the conversation I had overheard, about Marcus's financial troubles and his attempt to get me to invest my inheritance. Detective Morrison listened without interrupting, her pen moving steadily across the page. When I finished, she looked up at me, her expression unreadable. Why didn't you report this earlier? She asked. I didn't think anyone would believe me, I said. It was just a conversation. Nothing concrete. And he's family. I didn't want to cause problems if I was wrong. But you don't think you're wrong, do you? Detective Morrison said. I met her eyes. No, I said. I don't. She nodded slowly. Okay. Here's what I need you to do. Don't mention any of this to your uncle or your mother. Not yet. If Marcus is staging this, we don't want to tip him off that we're suspicious. Can you do that? I nodded, relief flooding through me. Someone was finally taking me seriously. Detective Morrison stood. We're going to investigate this thoroughly, she said. Check Marcus's hotel room, his phone records, his financial situation. If this is real, we'll find him. If it's not, we'll prove it. Either way, you did the right thing by telling me. She left me in the study, and I sat there for a long moment, my hands folded in my lap, trying to process everything. The house was quiet except for the murmur of voices from the living room. Through the window, I could see the sky lightning, pink and gold streaking across the horizon. It should have been beautiful, but all I felt was a deep, bone-tired dread. Over the next 24 hours, the investigation moved quickly. Detective Morrison and Detective Park worked with a team to trace Marcus's movements. They found his rental car abandoned in a parking garage downtown, but there were no signs of a struggle. His hotel room was neat, his belongings still there, his laptop sitting on the desk. They pulled security footage from the hotel and the parking garage. The footage showed Marcus leaving the hotel alone the night before, carrying a small duffel bag. He got into his car and drove to the garage, where he parked and walked out, still carrying the bag. And then he disappeared. No one grabbed him, Detective Morrison told us, gathered again in the mansion's living room. He walked out of that garage of his own free will. We've checked every camera in a 3-block radius. He didn't get into another car. He just vanished. What does that mean? My mother asked, her voice small and frightened. It means we need to consider the possibility that Marcus staged his own kidnapping, Detective Morrison said bluntly. Uncle Richard shot to his feet, his face flushing red. That's ridiculous, he shouted. Why would he do that? He's my son. He wouldn't put me through this. Mr. Chen, Detective Park said calmly, we've looked into Marcus's financial situation. He's in significant debt. His apartment in New York is being foreclosed on. He owes money to several creditors. And he recently lost his job at the hedge fund. The room went silent. Uncle Richard stared at the detective, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. That can't be right, he said finally. He told me everything was fine. He said business was good. I'm sorry, Detective Morrison said, and she actually did sound sympathetic. But the evidence suggests otherwise. We believe Marcus may have orchestrated this kidnapping to extort money from you, money he desperately needs. My mother made a small, wounded sound, and I went to her, putting my arm around her shoulders. She was shaking, her face buried in her hands. We need proof, Uncle Richard said, but his voice had lost its conviction. He sank back onto the couch, looking suddenly old and defeated. We're working on it, Detective Morrison said. We've traced the phone that sent the ransom demand. It's a burner, purchased with cash 3 days ago at a convenience store in Capitol Hill. We're pulling security footage from that store now. She looked at me when she said Capitol Hill, and I understood. That was my neighborhood. Marcus had been there, watching me, and he had bought the phone he would use to fake his own kidnapping. The detectives left, promising to update us as soon as they had more information. The house felt hollow after they were gone, filled with a heavy, oppressive silence. My mother went upstairs to lie down, and Uncle Richard retreated to the library with a bottle of whiskey. I stayed in the living room, staring out the window at the garden where the roses were finally beginning to wilt, their petals brown and curling. My phone buzzed, and I looked down to see a text from an unknown number. I need to talk to you. Meet me at the old boathouse at Seward Park in 1 hour. Come alone. It's important. Marcus. My heart stopped. I stared at the message, reading it over and over. The boathouse at Seward Park was a place we had gone as kids, a weathered structure at the edge of the lake where we used to skip stones and tell secrets. No one else would know about it. I should call Detective Morrison. I knew I should. But something held me back. If Marcus was reaching out to me, maybe I could get him to confess, to admit what he had done. Maybe I could end this without destroying what was left of our family. I grabbed my coat and keys and slipped out of the house without telling anyone where I was going. The drive to Seward Park took 20 minutes, and with every mile, I questioned my decision. This was stupid. This was dangerous. But I kept driving. The park was nearly empty when I arrived, just a few joggers on the trails and a woman walking her dog near the playground. I parked and made my way down the path toward the lake, my breath coming out in white puffs in the cold air. The trees were bare, their branches black against the gray sky, and fallen leaves crunched under my feet. The boathouse came into view, a small wooden structure with peeling paint and a sagging roof. It looked abandoned, forgotten. I approached slowly, every sense on high alert. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear movement inside. "Marcus?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and scared. The door opened, and Marcus stepped out. He looked terrible, his hair messy, his clothes rumpled, dark circles under his eyes. But he was unharmed, clearly not a kidnapping victim. "Rebecca," he said, and his voice was desperate, pleading. "Thank God you came." I didn't know who else to turn to. "What are you doing, Marcus?" I asked, staying several feet away from him. "The police know. They know you faked this." His face crumpled, and for a moment, he looked like the boy I had grown up with, vulnerable and lost. "I didn't have a choice," he said. "I'm in so much trouble, Beck. I owe people money. Dangerous people. If I don't pay them back, they're going to kill me. So you decided to fake a kidnapping and extort your own father?" I said, anger rising in my chest. "Do you have any idea what you've put him through? What you've put all of us through?" "I know," Marcus said, running his hands through his hair. "I know it was wrong. But I was desperate. And I thought, if I could just get enough money to pay off my debts, I could disappear for a while, let things cool down, and then come back and make it right." "You can't make this right, Marcus," I said. "You've committed a crime. Multiple crimes. And the police are going to find you. That's why I need your help," he said, taking a step toward me. "I need money, Beck. Just enough to get out of the country, start over somewhere. You're about to inherit millions. You could spare 100,000. It would barely make a dent in your share." I stared at him, incredulous. "You want me to give you money? After everything you've done?" "Please," he said, and there were tears in his eyes now. "I'm begging you. We're family. We used to be close. Don't you remember? All those summers at grandmother's house, all the promises we made to always look out for each other." I remembered. I remembered all of it. But the Marcus standing in front of me wasn't the cousin I had known. He was a stranger, someone who had let greed and desperation turn him into something unrecognizable. "I can't help you," I said quietly. "You need to turn yourself in. Face what you've done." His expression changed, the pleading replaced by something harder, colder. "I was afraid you'd say that," he said. He reached into his jacket, and my whole body went rigid with fear. But what he pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was a phone. "I recorded our conversation at lunch," he said. "You agreeing to consider my investment proposal. I can edit it, make it sound like you were in on this from the beginning. Like we planned the fake kidnapping together to get money from my dad." "You wouldn't," I said, but my voice shook. "Try me," Marcus said. "Give me the money, or I'll make sure you go down with me." We stood there, facing each other across the weathered boards of the boathouse deck, and I realized with a sinking certainty that I had made a terrible mistake coming here alone. Marcus was cornered, desperate, and desperate people were capable of anything. But before I could respond, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Detective Morrison and Detective Park emerging from the trees, along with two uniformed officers. Relief flooded through me so intensely my knees almost buckled. "Marcus Chen," Detective Morrison said, her voice calm and authoritative, "you're under arrest for filing a false police report, extortion, and attempted fraud." Marcus's face went white, then red. He looked at me, betrayal and fury in his eyes. "You set me up," he said. I shook my head. "I didn't. I swear." Detective Morrison came to stand beside me. "She didn't," she said. "We've been tracking your phone since you sent that text. We followed Miss Chen here and heard everything, including your attempt to blackmail her." The officers moved forward and handcuffed Marcus. He didn't resist, just stood there with his head down as they read him his rights. The words washed over me, familiar from 1,000 TV shows but surreal in this moment, in this place where we had once been children without a care in the world. They led him away, and I watched until he disappeared into the police car. Detective Morrison stayed with me, her hand on my shoulder. "You did good," she said. "I know that wasn't easy." I didn't feel good. I felt hollow, scraped out, like something essential had been carved away. "That was my cousin," I said. "We grew up together." "I know," Detective Morrison said gently. "But he made his choices. You're not responsible for them." We walked back to the parking lot together, and she explained what would happen next. Marcus would be charged, there would be a trial, and I would likely have to testify. The family would be torn apart, the scandal would be public, and nothing would ever be the same. When I got back to the mansion, my mother and Uncle Richard were waiting in the living room. Detective Park had called ahead, told them what had happened. My mother looked devastated, her eyes red and swollen. Uncle Richard just looked broken, sitting on the couch with his head in his hands. "I'm sorry," I said, though I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for. For Marcus's actions? For being the one to expose them? For the inheritance that had started all of this? My mother came to me and pulled me into a hug. "You have nothing to be sorry for," she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "You did the right thing. The brave thing." But Uncle Richard didn't look at me. He stood and walked out of the room without a word, and I heard the front door slam a moment later. My mother flinched at the sound. "He'll come around," she said, but she didn't sound convinced. "He's just in shock." We all are. Over the following weeks, the story came out in pieces. The police investigation revealed the full extent of Marcus's plan. He had been planning the fake kidnapping for over a month, ever since Grandmother Eleanor's will had been read. He had researched how to disguise his voice, how to create convincing ransom demands, how to disappear without leaving a trail. He had bought the burner phone, scouted locations, even taken the photo himself using a timer and careful positioning. But what the investigation also revealed was something I hadn't known, something that made the whole situation even more tragic. Marcus had been telling the truth about owing money to dangerous people. He had gotten involved with loan sharks in New York, borrowing money to cover his debts from the failed hedge fund, and the interest had spiraled out of control. He was in deep, far deeper than anyone had realized, and he had seen the inheritance as his only way out. It didn't excuse what he had done. Nothing could excuse that. but it helped me understand, at least a little, how he had gotten to that point. How desperation could twist someone into making choices they never would have considered otherwise. The trial was set for 6 months later. In the meantime, life went on in a strange, muted way. I returned to teaching, throwing myself into my work, finding comfort in the routine of lesson plans and grading papers. My mother stayed at the mansion, slowly going through grandmother Eleanor's things, packing up a lifetime of memories. Uncle Richard moved to Arizona to be near his ex-wife, Patricia. I heard through my mother that he had started therapy, trying to process everything that had happened. He never called me, never reached out, and I didn't blame him. I had been the one to expose his son, even if it had been necessary. Some wounds were too deep to heal. The inheritance was finally distributed, the legal process grinding forward despite the scandal. I received my share, $3.5 million that sat in my bank account like a weight. I didn't touch it for months, couldn't bring myself to. It felt tainted, blood money, the thing that had destroyed my family. But slowly, with the help of a therapist and long conversations with Sarah, I began to see it differently. The money wasn't the problem. Greed was the problem. Desperation was the problem. The choices Marcus had made were the problem. The money was just money, and I could choose to use it in ways that honored grandmother Eleanor's memory, ways that did good in the world. I set up a scholarship fund for low-income students pursuing teaching degrees. I donated to organizations that helped people struggling with debt and financial literacy. I kept enough to live comfortably, to buy a small house with a garden where I could plant roses like the ones at grandmother's mansion. And slowly, the weight began to lift. The trial came and went. Marcus pleaded guilty to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. I didn't attend the sentencing. I couldn't bear to see him in that courtroom, to watch him be led away in handcuffs. My mother went, and she told me later that Marcus had cried, that he had apologized to the judge and to our family, that he had seemed genuinely remorseful. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe that somewhere inside the man who had tried to extort his own father and blackmail me, there was still the boy I had known, the cousin I had loved. But I didn't know if I would ever be able to forgive him. Forgiveness felt like something beyond my reach, a distant shore I couldn't quite swim to. A year after grandmother Eleanor's death, I found myself back at the mansion. My mother had decided to sell it, unable to live there alone with all the memories, both good and bad. We were having one last family gathering before the sale went through, a small, quiet affair with just the two of us and a few close friends. I walked through the rooms, touching the furniture, running my fingers along the spines of books in the library, standing in the garden where the roses had been replanted and were blooming again, vibrant and alive. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the weight of secrets and lies had been lifted. In the study, I found a letter tucked into one of grandmother Eleanor's books. It was addressed to me in her elegant, spidery handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it, and I sat down in her old chair to read. My dearest Rebecca, the letter began. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and I hope you have found peace with the inheritance I have left you. I know that money can be both a blessing and a curse, and I have seen what it can do to families, how it can bring out the worst in people. But I also believe it can bring out the best, if we let it. You have always had a good heart, Rebecca, a kind and generous spirit. I trust you to use what I have given you wisely, to make the world a little better than you found it. And I hope you will remember that family is not just about blood. It is about the people who stand by you, who love you even when things are hard, who choose you every day. Hold on to those people. They are your true inheritance. With all my love, Grandmother Eleanor. Tears streamed down my face as I read, and I clutched the letter to my chest, feeling the presence of my grandmother as if she were standing right beside me. She had known. Somehow, she had known that the money would cause problems, that it would test us, and she had left me this message to guide me through it. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my pocket, then went to find my mother. She was in the kitchen, packing up the last of the dishes, and when she saw my face, she set down the box she was holding and came to me. "What is it?" she asked, concern in her eyes. I showed her the letter, and we read it together, standing in the kitchen that smelled like lemon cleaner and old wood. When we finished, my mother wiped her eyes and smiled, a real smile, the first I had seen from her in months. "She always knew what to say," my mother said softly. "Even from beyond the grave." We finished packing in comfortable silence, and as the sun began to set, we locked the door of the mansion for the last time. I looked back at the house, at the windows glowing gold in the fading light, and I felt a sense of closure, of an ending that was also a beginning. Life moved forward. It always does. I continued teaching, finding joy in my students and their growth. I dated, cautiously at first, then with more confidence, eventually meeting someone who made me laugh and feel safe and seen. My mother sold the mansion and bought a smaller house near mine, and we had dinner together every Sunday, a tradition that became the anchor of my week. I heard news of Marcus occasionally, filtered through my mother who still kept in touch with Uncle Richard. Marcus was released from prison after 20 months for good behavior. He moved to Arizona as well, living with his father while he tried to rebuild his life. He got a job at a local bank, nothing glamorous, but honest work. He started attending meetings for people struggling with debt and addiction, sharing his story as a cautionary tale. And then, 2 years after his release, I got a letter from him. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, the envelope plain and white with my address written in handwriting I still recognized. I stared at it for a long time before I opened it, my heart pounding, not sure if I was ready for whatever it contained. "Dear Rebecca," the letter began. "I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve the chance to apologize. But I need to try. What I did was unforgivable. I let greed and fear turn me into someone I didn't recognize, someone who was willing to hurt the people I loved most in the world. I destroyed our family, betrayed your trust, and caused pain that I can never fully repair. I have spent every day since then trying to understand how I got to that point, how I let things spiral so far out of control. And I have spent every day trying to become someone better, someone who would make Grandmother Eleanor proud instead of ashamed. I don't expect you to respond to this letter. I don't expect anything from you. But I wanted you to know that I am sorry, truly and deeply sorry, and that I think about you often. I remember those summers at the mansion, the treehouse we built, the secrets we shared. I remember when we were friends, when we were family in the truest sense of the word. I know I destroyed that, and I will carry that regret for the rest of my life. I hope you are happy, Rebecca. I hope you have found peace and joy and all the things you deserve. And I hope that someday, maybe not today or tomorrow or even next year, but someday, you might be able to think of me without anger or pain. That would be enough. That would be more than I deserve. With deepest regret and love, Marcus. I read the letter 3 times, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold in front of me. The words felt genuine, raw with emotion and remorse. but I didn't know if I believed them. Or maybe I did believe them, but I didn't know if belief was enough. I thought about Grandmother Eleanor's letter, about her words on family and forgiveness. I thought about the boy Marcus had been and the man he had become and the man he was trying to be now. And I thought about myself, about the anger and hurt I had been carrying for years, about how heavy it had become. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about Marcus. It wasn't about saying that what he had done was okay or that the pain he had caused didn't matter. Forgiveness was about me, about choosing to let go of the weight I had been carrying, about refusing to let his actions define the rest of my life. I didn't write back right away. I needed time to sit with the letter, to process my feelings, to talk it through with my therapist and with Sarah and with my mother. But eventually, after several weeks, I sat down and wrote a response. Dear Marcus, I wrote. I received your letter, and I appreciate your apology. What you did hurt me deeply, hurt all of us, and that pain doesn't just disappear because time has passed. But I also recognize that you were in a dark place, that you made terrible choices out of desperation, and that you have been working to make amends. I don't know if I can forgive you completely. I don't know if our relationship can ever be what it was. But I am willing to try to move forward, to let go of some of the anger I have been holding on to. Not for you, but for me. Because I don't want to spend the rest of my life defined by what you did. I hope you continue to work on yourself, to build a life you can be proud of. And maybe, someday, we can talk. Not as the people we were, but as the people we are becoming. Take care of yourself, Rebecca. I mailed the letter and felt a small shift inside me, like a door that had been locked for years finally opening just a crack. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the beginning of something. A willingness to consider the possibility. Months passed, then a year. Marcus and I exchanged occasional emails, brief and polite, updating each other on our lives. He told me about his job, about the volunteer work he was doing with financial literacy programs, about the small apartment he had rented and the garden he was trying to grow. I told him about my students, about the scholarship fund, about the house I had bought and the life I was building. And then, on the 3rd anniversary of Grandmother Eleanor's death, Marcus asked if he could visit Seattle, if we could meet for coffee. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the keyboard, old fears and hurts rising up. But then I thought about Grandmother Eleanor's letter, about family and forgiveness and choosing to move forward. I agreed. We met at a small coffee shop in Capitol Hill, neutral territory, a place with big windows and the smell of fresh roasted beans and the comfortable hum of conversation. I arrived early and chose a table near the back, my hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea, my heart beating too fast. Marcus walked in right on time, and I barely recognized him. He had lost weight, his face leaner, more lined. His hair was shorter, touched with gray at the temples. He wore jeans and a simple sweater, nothing like the expensive suits I remembered. He looked older, humbler, like someone who had been broken and was slowly putting himself back together. He saw me and smiled, tentative and uncertain, and I found myself smiling back. He ordered a coffee and came to sit across from me, and for a long moment, we just looked at each other, years of history and pain and regret hanging between us. "Hi," he said finally, his voice soft. "Hi," I said. We talked for 2 hours, the conversation awkward at first, then gradually becoming easier. He told me about his time in prison, about the therapy he had undergone, about the moment he had realized that he had to take full responsibility for his actions, that he couldn't blame his circumstances or his desperation anymore. He told me about the amends he was trying to make, not just to our family but to the people he had hurt in New York, the investors who had lost money because of his schemes. I told him about the scholarship fund, about the students whose lives had been changed because of it. I told him about my mother, about how she was doing, about the Sunday dinners that had become our tradition. I told him about the letter grandmother Eleanor had left me, and I watched his eyes fill with tears as I described her words about family and forgiveness. "I miss her," he said, his voice breaking. "I miss her so much. And I hate that I disappointed her, that I became exactly the kind of person she would have been ashamed of." "She loved you," I said gently. "Even when you made mistakes. That's what family does." "Do you think she would have forgiven me?" he asked. I thought about it, about the woman who had raised us, who had been tough and demanding but also deeply loving. "I think she would have wanted you to forgive yourself," I said. "I think that's what she would have cared about most." We finished our coffee, and Marcus walked me to my car. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the air was cool and crisp, smelling of autumn leaves and distant rain. "Thank you," Marcus said as we stood by my car, "for giving me this chance. For not writing me off completely." "I'm not saying everything is okay," I said. "I'm not saying we're back to how we were. But I'm willing to try. To see if we can build something new." He nodded, and I could see the gratitude and relief in his eyes. "That's all I can ask for," he said. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in years, as if I had set down a burden I hadn't even realized I was still carrying. The road ahead was uncertain, and I didn't know if Marcus and I would ever truly be close again. But I had taken the first step, and that felt like enough. Over the following year, Marcus and I continued to rebuild our relationship, slowly and carefully, like archaeologists piecing together fragments of something ancient and precious. He visited Seattle every few months, and we would meet for coffee or lunch, talking about our lives, our hopes, our regrets. He met my partner, and they got along well, bonding over a shared love of hiking and terrible puns. He came to one of my school's open houses and met some of my students, and I saw the way his face lit up when they talked about their dreams for the future. He was different now, fundamentally changed by what he had been through. The arrogance and entitlement that had driven him to make such terrible choices were gone, replaced by a humility and gratitude that seemed genuine. He talked openly about his mistakes, about the therapy he continued to attend, about the daily work of trying to be a better person. And slowly, cautiously, I began to trust him again. Not blindly, not the way I had when we were children, but with the clear-eyed understanding of someone who had been hurt and had chosen to risk being hurt again. It was a different kind of trust, harder one and more precious for it. My mother was slower to come around. She had been devastated by what Marcus had done, not just to me but to Uncle Richard, to the whole family. But she saw the effort he was making, the genuine remorse, and eventually, she agreed to see him. They met at her house, and I wasn't there, but she told me later that they had talked for hours, that Marcus had cried and apologized and listened as she told him how much he had hurt her. "It will take time," she told me. "But I think he's trying. I think he really is trying." Uncle Richard was the hardest to reach. He had been so broken by Marcus's betrayal, so ashamed of his son's actions, that he had withdrawn from the family almost completely. But Marcus kept trying, sending letters, making phone calls, showing up even when he wasn't welcome. And finally, after 2 years, Uncle Richard agreed to see him. I don't know what they said to each other in that meeting. Marcus never told me, and I never asked. But afterward, Uncle Richard started calling my mother again, started coming to family gatherings, started slowly rebuilding the connections that had been severed. He looked older, more fragile, but there was a peace in his eyes that hadn't been there before. 5 years after Grandmother Eleanor's death, we held a memorial service at the cemetery where she was buried. It was a small gathering, just family and a few close friends, but it felt important, a way to honor her memory and acknowledge how far we had all come. We stood around her grave, the marble headstone gleaming in the afternoon sun, and took turns sharing memories. My mother talked about growing up with Eleanor as her mother, about the lessons she had learned about strength and resilience. Uncle Richard talked about his sister, about the complicated relationship they had had, about the regrets he carried. And Marcus talked about his grandmother, about the ways she had shaped him, about how he wished he could tell her he was sorry, that he was trying to live up to the values she had instilled in him. When it was my turn, I pulled out the letter Grandmother Eleanor had left me, now worn and creased from being read so many times. I read it aloud, my voice steady, and when I finished, I looked around at my family, at the people who had been broken and were slowly healing. She knew, I said. She knew that the inheritance would test us, that it would bring out both the best and the worst in us. But she also believed we could get through it, that we could choose to be better. And I think we have. Not perfectly, not without pain, but we've tried. And I think that would make her proud. There were tears, and hugs, and a sense of closure that felt like a gift. We left flowers on the grave, bright red roses like the ones that had grown in her garden, and as we walked back to our cars, I felt Grandmother Eleanor's presence with us, a gentle warmth that seemed to say we had done well, that we had honored her memory in the way that mattered most. Life continued to unfold in its messy, beautiful way. I got engaged to my partner, and we planned a small wedding in the garden of my house, surrounded by the roses I had planted. Marcus was invited, and he came, standing beside Uncle Richard and my mother, his face full of genuine happiness for me. It was a moment I had never thought possible 5 years ago, but here it was, real and precious. The scholarship fund continued to grow, helping dozens of students pursue their dreams of becoming teachers. I received letters from recipients, telling me how the scholarship had changed their lives, how it had made the impossible possible. Each letter felt like a validation of the choice I had made to use the inheritance for good, to turn something that had caused so much pain into something that created opportunity and hope. Marcus started his own program in Arizona, working with people who were struggling with debt and financial crisis, offering counseling and support and practical advice. He told me it was his way of making amends, of using his own terrible mistakes to help others avoid the same pitfalls. He was good at it, empathetic and honest, and I was proud of him in a way I never thought I would be again. We never talked about the fake kidnapping anymore. It was a scar we all carried, a reminder of how close we had come to losing everything. But it was also a testament to the fact that people could change, that forgiveness was possible, that families could survive even the worst betrayals if they were willing to do the work. On the 10th anniversary of Grandmother Eleanor's death, I found myself back at the cemetery, standing alone at her grave. It was early morning, the air cool and misty, the grass wet with dew. I had brought roses, of course, and I laid them carefully at the base of the headstone. "Thank you," I said softly, my words carried away by the breeze. "Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for the inheritance, not just the money, but the lessons. Thank you for teaching me about strength and forgiveness and what it means to be family." I stood there for a long time, feeling the peace of the place settle over me like a blanket. The sun rose higher, burning away the mist, and the world came into focus, sharp and clear and beautiful. I thought about everything that had happened, all the pain and betrayal and slow, hard-won healing. I thought about Marcus and Uncle Richard and my mother and all the ways we had been broken and put back together, not the same as before, but stronger for the cracks. And I thought about Grandmother Eleanor, about the legacy she had left, not just in money but in the values she had instilled, the love she had given, the faith she had had in us to be better than our worst moments. I turned to leave, but something made me pause. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and familiar. "Hey, Beck," he said. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said. "I'm at the cemetery. At Grandmother's grave. And I just wanted to tell you something." "What's that?" he asked. "I forgive you," I said, and the words felt like a release, like something I had been holding onto for too long finally letting go. "I forgive you, Marcus. Completely." There was a long silence, and I could hear him breathing, could imagine the tears I knew were falling. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Rebecca. That means more than you know." We talked for a few more minutes, about nothing important, just the comfortable conversation of family. And when we hung up, I felt lighter than I had in years, as if I had finally set down the last piece of the burden I had been carrying. I walked back to my car, the morning sun warm on my face, and drove home to the life I had built, the life that was full of love and purpose and second chances. The inheritance had tested us, had nearly destroyed us, but in the end, it had also taught us what really mattered. Not the money, not the mansion, not the things that could be bought and sold. But the people we chose to stand by, the forgiveness we chose to offer, the love we chose to give even when it was hard. That was the real inheritance. That was what Grandmother Eleanor had left us. And it was worth more than all the millions in the world. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment, looking at my house with its garden full of roses, at the life I had created from the ashes of betrayal and pain. My partner was waiting inside, probably making breakfast, and I could smell coffee and bacon drifting through the open window. It was a simple moment, ordinary and perfect, and I felt a rush of gratitude so intense it brought tears to my eyes. This was home. Not the mansion, not the inheritance, but this. The people I loved, the work I did, the choices I made every day to be kind and generous and forgiving. This was what mattered. This was what would last. I got out of the car and walked to the front door, and as I reached for the handle, I thought about Grandmother Eleanor one last time. I imagined her smiling, that sharp, knowing smile she used to give me when I had figured something out on my own. I imagined her nodding in approval, proud of the woman I had become, proud of the family we had managed to save. And I whispered one more thank you to the morning air, to the memory of the woman who had given me so much more than money, who had given me the tools to survive the worst and build something beautiful from the ruins. Then I opened the door and stepped inside, into the warmth and light and love that waited for me there, into the life I had chosen, into the future I was creating one day at a time. The inheritance had been a test, a trial by fire that had burned away everything false and left only what was true. And what was true was this: family was complicated and messy and sometimes broken, but it was also resilient and capable of healing and worth fighting for. Love was hard and required sacrifice and forgiveness, but it was also the most powerful force in the world, capable of transforming even the deepest wounds into scars that told a story of survival. And I was stronger than I had ever known, capable of facing betrayal and fear and loss and coming out the other side not just intact but better, wiser, more compassionate. That was Grandmother Eleanor's real gift to me. Not the money, though that had helped, but the opportunity to discover who I really was, what I was made of, what I valued most. She had known that the inheritance would test me, and she had trusted me to pass that test, to emerge from it as someone she could be proud of. And I had. We all had. In our own ways, in our own time, we had all risen to the challenge she had set before us. We had stumbled and fallen and made mistakes, but we had also gotten back up, dusted ourselves off, and kept going. We had chosen forgiveness over bitterness, love over hate, hope over despair. That was the story I would tell my children someday, if I was blessed with them. Not the story of the fake kidnapping or the betrayal or the pain, though those were part of it, but the story of how a family had been broken and had chosen to heal, how people had made terrible mistakes and had worked to make amends, how love had proven stronger than greed and forgiveness had proven more powerful than revenge. That was the legacy I wanted to leave, the inheritance I wanted to pass on. Not money or property or things, but values and lessons and the knowledge that no matter how dark things got, there was always a way forward, always a choice to be made, always hope. I spent the rest of that day in quiet contentment, working in my garden, having lunch with my partner, grading papers for my students. Ordinary things, simple things, but they felt sacred in their ordinariness, precious in their simplicity. This was the life I had built from the ruins of what could have been a tragedy, and I was grateful for every moment of it. That evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea and thought about the journey that had brought me here. From the day Grandmother Eleanor died to this moment, 5 years later, so much had changed. I had changed. Marcus had changed. Our whole family had been transformed by what we had been through. And while I wouldn't wish that pain on anyone, while I would give anything to have avoided the betrayal and fear and heartbreak, I also couldn't deny that it had made me who I was. It had taught me lessons I never would have learned otherwise, had shown me depths of strength and capacity for forgiveness I hadn't known I possessed. That was the paradox of suffering, I realized. It was terrible and transformative, destructive and creative, the worst thing that could happen and sometimes the catalyst for the best things. It broke you open and forced you to rebuild yourself, and in that rebuilding, you had the chance to become someone better, someone stronger, someone more fully yourself. I thought about Detective Morrison, who had believed me when no one else did, who had helped bring the truth to light. I had sent her a thank you card after the trial, but I wondered if she knew how much her support had meant, how much it had helped me trust my own instincts and stand up for myself. She had been a stranger who had become an unexpected ally, a reminder that help could come from the most unlikely places. And I thought about Sarah, my best friend who had stood by me through everything, who had listened to my fears and validated my concerns and encouraged me to trust myself. She had been my rock, my constant, and I made a mental note to call her tomorrow, to tell her how much she meant to me, how grateful I was for her friendship. The stars began to appear, one by one, pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. I watched them emerge, thinking about how they were always there, even when we couldn't see them, even when the sun was too bright or the clouds too thick. They were constant, reliable, a reminder that some things endured no matter what. That was what I wanted to be for the people I loved. A constant, a light in the darkness, someone they could count on no matter what. And I wanted to surround myself with people who would be that for me, who would stand by me through the storms and celebrate with me in the sunshine. I had learned, through all of this, that family wasn't just about blood. It was about choice. It was about the people who showed up, who did the work, who loved you even when it was hard. Marcus was family because he had done the work to earn back that place, because he had shown genuine remorse and made real changes. Uncle Richard was family because he had chosen to forgive and rebuild. My mother was family because she had stood by me and supported me and loved me unconditionally. And Sarah and my partner and the students I taught and the people whose lives had been touched by the scholarship fund, they were family too. Not by blood, but by choice, by love, by the connections we had forged through shared experiences and mutual support. That was the real meaning of home, I realized. Not a place, not a building, not even a group of people related by genetics. But a feeling of belonging, of being seen and known and loved for who you really were. Home was wherever you felt safe enough to be vulnerable, strong enough to be weak, loved enough to be yourself. And I had found that. After everything, after all the pain and betrayal and fear, I had found home. Not in the mansion where I had grown up, not in the inheritance that had nearly destroyed us, but here, in this small house with its garden of roses, with the people I had chosen and who had chosen me. My partner came out onto the porch, carrying 2 glasses of wine, and sat down beside me. We didn't speak, just sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars multiply overhead. Their hand found mine, warm and solid, and I squeezed it gently, a silent thank you for being here, for choosing me, for building this life with me. What are you thinking about? They asked after a while, their voice soft in the darkness. Everything, I said. The past 5 years. How much has changed. How grateful I am. They leaned their head on my shoulder, and I felt the weight of it, comforting and real. You've come a long way, they said. You should be proud. I am, I said. And I meant it. I was proud of myself, of the choices I had made, of the person I had become. I was proud of my family, of the healing we had done, of the forgiveness we had offered and received. I was proud of the life I had built, simple and ordinary and absolutely perfect. We sat there until the sky was fully dark and the stars were brilliant overhead, and then we went inside, into the warmth and light of our home. And as I closed the door behind us, I felt a sense of completion, of a chapter ending and a new one beginning. The story of the inheritance, of the fake kidnapping, of the betrayal and the healing, was over. It would always be part of my history, a scar I would carry, but it no longer defined me. I had moved beyond it, had grown past it, had become someone bigger and better than the worst thing that had happened to me. And that, I realized, was the ultimate victory. Not that I had survived, though that mattered. Not that I had forgiven, though that was important. But that I had thrived, that I had taken the broken pieces of my life and built something beautiful from them, that I had refused to let pain and betrayal turn me bitter or small or afraid. I had chosen love. I had chosen forgiveness. I had chosen hope. And those choices had made all the difference. Years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to the story, new chapters to the life I was building. I got married in that garden full of roses, with my mother crying happy tears and Marcus standing among the guests, his face full of genuine joy for me. Uncle Richard gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry, talking about family and second chances and the power of forgiveness. It was a perfect day, not because nothing went wrong, but because we were all there together, choosing to celebrate love and hope despite everything we had been through. My partner and I talked about having children, and eventually, we decided to adopt. The process was long and complicated, filled with paperwork and home visits and anxious waiting, but finally, we brought home a little girl with dark curly hair and eyes that sparkled with mischief. We named her Eleanor, after my grandmother, and from the moment she came into our lives, everything changed. Being a parent was harder than I had imagined, more exhausting and more rewarding, more terrifying and more joyful. I watched Eleanor grow, learning to walk and talk and read, and I saw in her the same curiosity and determination that grandmother Eleanor had possessed. I told her stories about her namesake, about the strong, wise woman who had built an empire and left a legacy that went far beyond money. And I told her, in age-appropriate ways, about the challenges our family had faced, about the mistakes that had been made and the forgiveness that had been offered. I wanted her to understand that families were complicated, that people made mistakes, but that love and forgiveness could heal even the deepest wounds. Marcus became Uncle Marcus to Eleanor, and he was wonderful with her, patient and playful and completely devoted. He would visit several times a year, bringing gifts and stories and an endless supply of terrible jokes that made her giggle. Watching them together, I felt a warmth in my chest that was part gratitude and part wonder. This was redemption, I thought. This was what it looked like when someone truly changed, when they did the work to become worthy of trust again. My mother became grandma, and she spoiled Eleanor shamelessly, just as grandmother Eleanor had spoiled me. She would take Eleanor to the park and the library and the ice cream shop, creating memories that I knew would last a lifetime. And sometimes, when I watched them together, I would see my grandmother in my mother's gestures, and the way she smiled at Eleanor, and the love that radiated from her. The scholarship fund continued to grow, and I started to receive letters from former recipients who were now teachers themselves, working in schools across the country, making a difference in the lives of their students. Each letter was a reminder that the inheritance had been used well, that something good had come from all the pain and struggle. Marcus's financial literacy program expanded, helping hundreds of people get out of debt and rebuild their lives. He wrote a book about his experiences, a brutally honest memoir about greed and desperation and the long road to redemption. It was published by a small press and didn't become a bestseller, but it reached the people who needed it, and that was what mattered. Uncle Richard retired and moved back to Seattle, buying a small condo near my mother's house. He and Marcus had rebuilt their relationship, though it would never be quite what it had been before. There was a wariness there, a carefulness, but there was also love and a commitment to moving forward. They had lunch together every week when Marcus was in town, and slowly, the wounds continued to heal. On Eleanor's 5th birthday, we had a party in the garden, and the whole family came. My mother and Uncle Richard, Marcus and his new girlfriend, Sarah and her husband and their kids, my colleagues from school, and a dozen of Eleanor's friends from preschool. The garden was full of laughter and music and the smell of birthday cake, and I stood on the porch, watching it all, feeling overwhelmed with gratitude. This was what grandmother Eleanor had wanted, I thought. Not the money or the mansion or the empire she had built, but this. Family gathered together, celebrating life, choosing love over bitterness, hope over despair. This was her legacy, and it was more valuable than all the millions in the world. Eleanor ran up to me, her face sticky with frosting, and threw her arms around my legs. "Mama," she said, "this is the best day ever." I picked her up, holding her close, breathing in the scent of her hair and feeling the solid weight of her in my arms. "Yes, baby," I said. "It really is." That night, after everyone had gone home and Eleanor was asleep in her bed, I sat in the garden alone, surrounded by the roses that bloomed in defiance of the approaching winter. The air was cold and crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves, and the sky was clear, stars scattered across it like diamonds on velvet. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from that terrible morning when Grandmother Eleanor died to this perfect evening surrounded by family and love. It had been a long road, full of pain and betrayal and fear, but also full of growth and healing and grace. I had been tested in ways I never could have imagined, pushed to my limits and beyond, forced to confront the worst in people I loved and the worst in myself. But I had survived. More than survived, I had thrived. I had built a life that was rich and full and meaningful, a life that honored Grandmother Eleanor's memory and the values she had instilled in me. I had learned that forgiveness was possible, that people could change, that love was stronger than hate and hope was more powerful than despair. And I had learned that home wasn't a place or a building or even a group of people. Home was a feeling, a sense of belonging and safety and love. Home was wherever you were seen and known and accepted for who you really were. Home was what you built, day by day, choice by choice, with the people you loved and who loved you back. I had found my home. After everything, after all the searching and struggling and pain, I had found it. Not in the mansion where I had grown up, not in the inheritance that had nearly destroyed us, but here, in this small house with its garden of roses, with my partner and my daughter and the family I had chosen and who had chosen me. This was home. This was where I belonged. And I was grateful, so deeply grateful, for every moment of it, for every person who had helped me get here, for every lesson I had learned along the way. I stood and walked back into the house, closing the door softly behind me. Inside, my partner was reading on the couch, and they looked up and smiled when they saw me. I sat down beside them, curling into their warmth, and they put their arm around me, holding me close. "Good party," they said, and I nodded against their shoulder. "The best," I said. "Thank you for helping make it happen." "Always," they said, and kissed the top of my head. We sat there in comfortable silence, and I felt the peace of the moment settle over me like a blanket. This was what mattered. Not the money or the inheritance or the things that could be bought and sold, but this. The quiet moments, the simple joys, the love that surrounded me and held me up. I thought about Grandmother Eleanor one last time, imagining her looking down on us, on the family she had left behind, on the life I had built from the ashes of betrayal and pain. I imagined her smiling, that sharp, knowing smile, proud of what we had become, proud of the choices we had made, proud of the love we had chosen over hate and the forgiveness we had offered over bitterness. "Thank you," I whispered, so softly that my partner didn't hear. "Thank you for everything. For the inheritance, for the lessons, for believing in me. For giving me the chance to discover who I really am and what I'm capable of. For teaching me about strength and forgiveness and what it means to be family." And I felt, in that moment, a sense of her presence, a warmth that seemed to wrap around me like a hug. It was probably just my imagination, just the power of memory and love and longing. But it felt real, and that was enough. I closed my eyes and let myself sink into the moment, into the warmth of my partner's embrace, into the peace of my home, into the life I had built and the future I was creating. And I felt, for the first time in years, completely at peace. The past was behind me, the wounds had healed into scars, and the future stretched out before me, full of possibility and hope. This was my inheritance. Not the money, though that had helped. But the strength to survive, the courage to forgive, the wisdom to choose love over hate and hope over despair. This was what Grandmother Eleanor had really left me, and it was worth more than all the millions in the world. I opened my eyes and looked around my living room, at the bookshelves full of stories, at the photos on the walls showing the people I loved, at the toys scattered across the floor from Eleanor's play. It was messy and imperfect and absolutely beautiful, and I wouldn't have changed a single thing. This was my life. This was my home. And I was exactly where I was meant to be. The clock on the mantel chimed 10, and my partner stirred beside me. "Bed?" they asked, and I nodded. We went upstairs together, checking on Eleanor one last time. She was sprawled across her bed, her stuffed animals scattered around her, her face peaceful in sleep. I tucked the blanket around her and kissed her forehead, breathing in the sweet scent of her, feeling my heart swell with love so intense it almost hurt. This was why I had fought so hard, why I had refused to let the betrayal and pain destroy me. For this. For her. For the chance to build a life full of love and meaning, to create a home where she would feel safe and cherished, to pass on the lessons grandmother Eleanor had taught me about strength and forgiveness and what really mattered. I would tell her the whole story someday, when she was old enough to understand. About the inheritance and the fake kidnapping and the long road to forgiveness. About how families could be broken and healed, about how people could make terrible mistakes and still find redemption, about how love was always worth fighting for. But for now, I would just love her, protect her, give her the childhood she deserved. And I would trust that when the time came, she would be strong enough to face whatever challenges life threw at her, wise enough to make good choices, brave enough to forgive when forgiveness was needed. Because that was what grandmother Eleanor had done for me. She had given me the tools I needed to survive, the values I needed to thrive, the love I needed to heal. And now it was my turn to pass those gifts on to the next generation, to be the kind of ancestor Eleanor would be proud of. I left Eleanor's room and went to my own bedroom, where my partner was already under the covers, waiting for me. I climbed in beside them, and they pulled me close, and I felt safe and loved and home. "I love you," I said, and they said it back, and those 3 words felt like a promise, a commitment, a choice we made every day to stand by each other no matter what. I closed my eyes and let sleep pull me under, and my last thought before I drifted off was of grandmother Eleanor, of her sharp eyes and knowing smile, of the legacy she had left that went so far beyond money or property or things. She had taught me what really mattered. Family. Love. Forgiveness. Hope. The courage to face hard things and the wisdom to choose kindness over cruelty, understanding over judgment, grace over revenge. That was the inheritance that would last, the legacy that would endure long after the money was spent and the mansion was sold and all of us were gone. That was what I would pass on to Eleanor, and what she would pass on to her children, and on through the generations. Love. Forgiveness. Hope. The things that made life worth living, the things that made us human, the things that connected us to each other and to something larger than ourselves. That was grandmother Eleanor's gift to me, and it was the most precious thing I had ever received. Not the millions of dollars, though I was grateful for them. But the lessons, the values, the love that had shaped me and made me who I was. And as I drifted off to sleep, wrapped in the warmth of my partner's arms, and the safety of my home, and the love of my family, I felt a deep and abiding gratitude for everything I had been given, everything I had survived, everything I had become. This was my story. This was my inheritance. And it was more than enough. It was everything.